This podcast is brought to you with the kind support of Harbour View Equity Partners. Harbour View Equity Partners is a global investment firm focused on opportunities in the entertainment and media space. Founded by Cherise Clark-Soares, Harbour View is a long-term investor in content with an industrial platform built to protect, optimize, and enhance the legacy of premium IP. With a vision of becoming a true stakeholder in the global value of content, Harbour View believes creators deserve a seat at the table creatively and economically, owning their narrative and maximising value for all. In celebration of our partnership with Harbour View Equity Partners, we have chosen a separate piece of music for each podcast in Series 1. We hope you enjoy it. Our next guest was a champion debater and still plays viola in a string quartet. Hear how the power of preparation and being the ballast of the middle voice has served her in an investment career where she is now a CIO. I'm Aoife Devitt, and welcome to the 50 Faces podcast, a podcast committed to revealing the richness and diversity of the world of investment by focusing on its people and their stories. I'm joined today by Sara Bonesteel, who's Chief Investment Officer, International Insurance at Prudential Financial, located in the New York City area. She was previously a Managing Director in Bear Stearns and JP Morgan. She's an Independent Director of Standard & Poor's Financial Services LLC, a member of the Board of Trustees of the New York Museum of Art, and she is also trained as a neuro leadership coach. Welcome, Sara. Thanks for joining me today.
Oh, thanks, Ethan. Very nice to be here with you today.
Well, let's talk about your career journey, starting with where you grew up and what you studied.
Sure. Well, I might have somewhat of an unconventional start. It probably wasn't predictable that I would have wound up in finance. I grew up in a little town called Chelsea, Michigan. It's a town of about 3,000, about an hour outside of Detroit, and really kind of a farm town. My family owned a furniture store there. And in fact, my youngest brother still runs it. I just went to the local high school. I was very involved in debate in high school and public speaking. And at the time, Georgetown was known as a great debate school. And I was eager to be in a big city. So I decided to apply to Georgetown and got in. And so that's where I did my undergrad. I did debate for a short time at Georgetown. And in fact, they told us at the time that my partner and I were the first female team. But ultimately, I got involved in other stuff. And my major was in English. And I was thinking that eventually I'd go to law school. That seemed like a sensible idea until I got a job as a sort of a paralegal at a DC law firm and got to see close up what that life was like. And the office itself was sort of felt like something out of Dickens. And the firm specialized in something really dry. It was transportation law. And to me, it was very dull. And it made me realize that maybe law was not really for me. Actually, I was really glad to have that experience to sort of rule out something as a career path. And despite that, lawyers are some of my best friends these days. But for me, I'm glad that was not my path.
I have to say, just the idea of a law firm looking like something out of Dickens, I can totally imagine the kind of the clerk, the piles of paper on the desk, beavering away, sort of a Christmas Carol style there, Ebenezer Scrooge style.
It was the era of IBM typewriters. It was a while ago. And yeah, sort of aged partners. Yeah, it was quite something.
So they're from another era. And I'd love to ask also, before we move on from there to your ultimate career path, the training in debate. I've always been in awe at debate participants at high school and college, just because it is such an intense. What do you think you learned in terms of honing your skills in debate there that have really led you through your life?
Yeah, absolutely. It's preparation and preparation for anything. So yeah, debate it's a very interesting activity. It involves the accumulation of tons of evidence to support your case, and then having to rebut the case of somebody else. So each year there is a topic, a very broad topic. There might be that the U.S. should change its energy policy, for instance. And one team of debaters will advance an argument about what that policy should be, and the other side has to argue against it. And so you sort of need to be ready for that argument that could be about anything. It could be wind, it could be solar, it could be anything super specific within any sort of alternative energy. So you really have to be on your toes. And so it involves a lot of researching ahead of time to make sure that you've got substantiated evidence. We used to walk around with these big cases full of little 4x6 cards that contained our little bits of evidence. And then when you get into debate itself, it's limited by time. And so to listen to a debate it's crazy because people speak a mile a minute. It's sort of a matter of getting as many arguments as you can into the allotted time. And so it's almost like listening to auctioneers or something. And if you fail to rebut an argument, then that's one that a judge can say, well, you didn't respond to that, and so I'm gonna take away some points for that. So it was great training and a lot of fun.
Extraordinary. And also, I'm sure, great in terms of performance skills and learning to speak in public, because you have to get over that anxiety pretty soon. So then you decided law was not for you. So how did your career then evolve?
Out of school, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. And I'd been working at the time at an arts nonprofit, which was fine, but it wasn't really what was going to eventually allow me to have my own apartment, maybe have a car, maybe pay my bills. So frankly, it was sort of a financial decision to go to business school. I'm interested in many, many things, and certainly business was one of them. So the decision was as easy as, well, it's only 2 years instead of a 3-year graduate program. Let's go and do that. So I applied to Columbia and went to Columbia for my business training and just filled in my liberal arts with obviously finance, economics, business-oriented classes.
Obviously, you said you filled in your liberal arts, so you came with some liberal arts background. Once you moved into finance, how do you find the liberal arts lends itself to that career? Because we're starting to realize now how much it matters to have diversity in backgrounds, but we still may focus more narrowly maybe on the strict financial training undergraduate degrees.
Yeah, and that dismays me some, because people think of liberal arts as not giving you skills. And I really disagree with that. So for instance, I was an English major, and what you learn as an English major is really how to think, and then how to organize those thoughts, and then how to communicate those ideas. And so those are skills that aren't necessarily easy to do if you haven't spent some time doing it. And I've seen a lot of very talented people, quantitatively talented people, brilliant people, struggle with the communication bit and have difficulty bridging the gap between what they know and what their audience knows, and how they can communicate, their thoughts to the audience. And I think it holds some people back. When I got later into my career, when I sort of postgraduate school, I found that I was often relied upon to be that person to sort of take the complex idea and communicate it in a clear and concise way to a client, for instance, who maybe was not a subject matter expert. And to me, that's a really useful skill. And it's, like you said, diversity is super important in the workplace, and and having those skills is part of the diversity that we need to have in organizations.
And before we dive into what's on your mind as a CIO today, I want to touch on one other aspect of your rich background, which is your musicianship. And I was delighted to hear that you still spend time playing in an orchestra. Can you tell us about that and what role it plays in your life?
Sure. Yeah. So I play the viola, which is a little less common of an instrument. And for those who aren't sure, a viola is played like a violin. So you play it under your chin, but it's bigger and it has a deeper tone than a violin. And so we're sort of the middle voice. We sort of try to pull the room together within an ensemble and create the middle tones. And I learned to play when I was a kid, and I was fairly serious about it at the time, but kind of put it down through the early years of my career and when our kids were small, because we have 3 children. But after they were in school, I had a little more time to practice, and now I play regularly in a quartet, and I also play in orchestras from time to time. And it is a wonderful counterpoint to the rest of my life. I mean, it teaches you a couple of things. I mean, first of all, when you're a child, you tend to practice because your parents tell you to. And when you grow up, you learn that if you practice, you get better. So that's sort of, an insight that's nice to carry around as an adult. And then secondly, when you're playing, it is just such an all-absorbing experience that you really can't think of it, about everything else that might be running in the back of your head. You need to worry that you're going to enter at the right place and with the right sound in measure 36. You need total focus on that. And so it's a nice break from the rest of your life to be able to totally focus like that.
You're describing it as almost like a sense of flow, and almost like a meditative process, being deep in the music like that, which is is really interesting.
It's very much like that. And you get that definitely in small groups, and especially if you're in a big group. If you're in a big and very accomplished group, this just sense of sort of oneness with the music is really great.
I also love that image about being in the middle and pulling the group together, because that's often a key role that may not get all the glory because it's not the solo violinist, etc. But it's really interesting to hear that perspective.
Yeah, I really enjoy that role. I don't always think I need to be, I'm not necessarily the diva. And the thing is, we need divas too. I don't feel like I need to play that role.
And it's so interesting. I also love relating it to the professional world because I think the thing about music is you're never really done. There's always more to learn. There's always more artistry to bring to the table. And I think that's a kind of a reminder to be humble, perhaps.
You're right. There is constant challenge. There's always more repertoire out there that you don't know or that is extremely challenging. And yep, still working through a lot of that. There's always a new challenge.
Well, speaking of the reminders to remain humble, certainly financial markets keep us on our toes. And what's on your mind now as a CIO in the insurance field, which is probably a field that's had its fair share of turmoil as well, given some of the recent developments?
Yeah, well, I guess from our perspective within the insurance world, the biggest story this year has really just been the change in rates and how can we take advantage of the higher rate environment that we've been handed by the Fed. It is in some ways the environment that we have been waiting for years. We've not seen 30-year rates, 10-year rates be this high in a long, long time. So that's tantalizing. The fact that we're skimping by on 10-year assets that were trading corporate assets with a 2%, 3% handle a couple of years ago. And now yields have perhaps doubled on assets like that. So that is super enticing. The issue is that we don't, within insurance companies, really trade our assets. We employ more of a buy and maintain strategy. And that's really because when we're selling assets, we're generating losses that can hurt our capital. So that's been a little difficult about this, but I do think that the rate environment is going to persist at least for a little while. I know that we had some news today that looks like inflation is abating. My personal view is that I think it's going to be stickier than that, and rates are going to stay elevated a little longer than many think. Our strategy has been to try to take advantage of both the elevated short rates by investing in shorter assets like CLOs that are floating rate and provide some protection against Fed actions, and then buying long-dated corporate bonds because I just think we're going to be so happy in 5 years that we took advantage of rates that we're seeing right now. Because ultimately, I do think rates are going to come down. It just is not likely to happen in the next year or two.
And what's the nature of your portfolio construction in that how much of your portfolio is in bonds versus other asset classes?
So we're very heavily concentrated in bonds and much like much of the rest of the life insurance industry. So we're roughly 95% fixed income, and the remaining 5% is alternatives, private equity, hedge funds, real estate.
This probably really is an environment you've been waiting for decades, in that it's finally getting a lot more kind of broad-based attention.
Yeah. So it's been great in publics in particular, because we've seen, obviously, with rates up and some meaningful spread widening, less so in privates. And we do have a significant amount of our fixed income portfolio invested in private placements as well as in commercial mortgages. We haven't seen quite the same responsiveness of spreads to the market there, at least not so far. Maybe it's still to come.
And what do you think about what's changed in your role over the last, say, in a role like yours over the last 5 years? What would you say the major changes are besides these bonds becoming more attractive? Are you paying more attention to some of the maybe sustainability side of what you invest in, or looking more globally, less globally, more aware of currency?
Yeah, we're slowly coming around, I would say, with respect to sustainability and ESG. Slow compared to, say, the European insurers. I think the US insurance industry has been a little slower to enact policies that really articulate how they're going to shape their portfolio with respect to ESG assets. So that has certainly been a primary concern over the last few years, like how we're going to do that. It's difficult. The information is difficult. Defining what an ESG investment is sometimes is difficult. So I think the whole world is on this path of trying to figure this out. It sounds easy, and yet it really isn't that easy to define.
Well, it's interesting that you're on that path. And I think there's always the advantage, of course, of being on the path a little later, because you get to learn from some of the experience of your peers globally. So hopefully get on that learning curve at a higher point.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, and we're watching the European insurers pretty carefully, and it's become a very politically charged topic too, just very recently, and that will be something that we'll have to contend with over the next little while too, I suppose.
Of course, and a part of the whole ESG and sustainability story is diversity. I'm focused always in this podcast on diversity in our industry in the investment profession. What has your experience been? You've had a solid career spanning decades in the investment profession so far. What would you say has improved or changed over the time?
Well, I'm not sure there's a lot that's improving. I'm sorry to say. I continue to hear from younger women, the same kind of challenges that I had when I was coming up. I'm not sure the financial industry really gets it yet in a real way. And unfortunately, that's a little self reinforcing that if the industry does not feel welcoming, then it's hard to recruit. And if you don't recruit, it's hard to feel welcoming if people can't see it so that they can be it. So we definitely face that challenge as an industry to just increase the inclusivity. I wish I had some magic answer, but we work hard at this at my firm, and we still struggle. The one area where I think we have seen some improvement is in maternity and paternity leave. And more men are taking it for sure. I've had two new dads on my team this year, and they've made full use of the paternity leave. And I think that that does create some space to see if men are taking it. It creates space for women, take time for childcare, for their family, during the day, go to that ball game, participate in activities in way that both men and women in ways that perhaps men didn't used to feel comfortable doing.
And it's interesting. Certainly, I would hope also our flexible working norms that are evolving more quickly now will also lend themselves to more kind of work family integration. I'm also curious though, and I suppose I'm kind of reaching that point myself. You've probably you've just been in more rooms, more meetings, more scenarios now at this stage than some women much younger in their careers. Is there anything that you can sort of point to that you think, oh, that's a mistake that keeps getting made, or maybe this isn't, maybe women need to be more visible or speak more in meetings or say, I think less and present their opinion more forcefully? Has anything ever kind of crystallized in your mind as something that would be a sort of a low-hanging fruit fix or something to fix?
Yeah, well, you've pinpointed something that I think is something that many women need to focus on, and it was hard for me as well too. I mean, often we're not necessarily the most aggressive voices in the room, and what I now tell women is to think about the last meeting that you've been in, and certainly you've heard, let's just say, I'll just call it a less informed question from someone of any gender. How was that question received? And most often, that question is still treated politely and answered. And maybe that question even sort of reveals a deeper question, or maybe you're even assumed to have asked a deeper question than what was on the surface. And to realize that it's okay. It's okay not to ask the perfect question, to not have every bit of information loaded into your brain before you ask it. You're better off asking the question, appearing engaged, appearing to own this problem with the group, than sort of sitting back and just sort of listening to the dialogue. It really does help you sort of change the way you're perceived in the room if you can be a little more active in that meeting.
And everyone appreciates an audience that's engaged as well, or a team player that's
Yes,
engaged. So
right.
it kind of is win-win. That's great advice. I love that concept of owning a problem, because it also, with it comes responsibility and accountability and all those kind of evidence of prestige and esteem in a role. So I think it all kind of builds. Another area, of course, where visibility is key and diversity has been proven to really make a difference is on boards. And I'd love to talk to you about your board roles, not only in the public company, but also, I failed to say in the introduction that you're chair of the investment committee at the New York Museum of Art, not just on the board of trustees. I'd love to know what you think makes a good board director or chair in these roles.
Yeah, so I think it's important to really know what your value and what your purpose is on that board. So you might have been brought onto the board for a particular reason that people know ahead of time. So that's great. But if not, you have to sort of look around the room, understand what the areas of expertise of your fellow board members are, and figure out kind of where you fit in. And so part of that fitting in is the experience that you bring, the skills that you bring, and making sure that people know about them. That's sort of how I think about it. So it's sort of knowing what you can contribute And also really knowing where management's role is. I've also been on boards where sort of board members want to step in and sort of offer strategy tips or maybe redo the strategy. And you have to know that as a board member, that's not truly your job, that you can question. That's not job one for you. I think job one is really to support management as best you can. And obviously there's the governance, really above that is the governance role that you're performing for stakeholders. And so that's job one. But with respect to management, you have to be somewhat cognizant of that manager's been given that job for a purpose. And your job is to support that manager, assuming that this is a competent manager, someone who's you can otherwise get behind.
And you have such a rich kind of bouquet of board roles, from an art museum to a nonprofit to a public company. How do you find that they then in turn influence your day job or the CIO role? What do you bring from them to that role?
So it's been great to be able to take that experience of sort of how a board looks at things into my day job, to sort of have that it sort of takes your thought process up a level. So now you're thinking more like a shareholder, more like a stakeholder, and sensitive to that level of issue. That just helps you as maybe you're working on an investment strategy, maybe you're thinking about an investment, and so maybe it leads you to a thought about, well, let's say this sours, or let's say that there's some issue with a participant in this deal. How will that look? What will the board ask me about this if this goes sideways? So it's helpful from that perspective.
And it's interesting, I'm kind of thinking back to your debate preparation. Obviously, if you think about it from the board lens, it would make you maybe in the CIO role have lots of evidence, be very well prepared.
Yes.
And be aware that maybe decisions are getting made without full information from board members who've just come in maybe on the day, and be prepared for all kinds of tangents to develop.
Absolutely. I spend a lot of time with board materials.
I just want to finally ask you something about an area that's quite close to my heart, because I've done a master's in neuroscience myself, neuro leadership. I'm fascinated by that aspect. What did you learn in your study to be a neuro leadership coach? What do you think you can share that we should all be thinking about more?
Yeah, neuro leadership coaching really focuses on what is happening in a person's brain as they function within an organization. And that really means in all senses. So it's not just what's happening intellectually, but it's emotion, it's feeling, it's what makes you feel threatened, what makes you feel reassured, what makes you defensive. And it's working with people one-on-one to really help them sort of organize to come up with a goal that they want to achieve, working through the steps that get them to that goal, and kind of reinforcing the work that they're doing toward that goal within this framework of knowing how the brain works. And so what I find most interesting about it is that it's really more about what the person being coached is doing. Your goal as a coach is really not to lead them to an answer, but to prompt them with questions to think about and have them sort of work through those questions verbally to sort of get to an answer that frankly they always knew, but didn't understand that they knew before you started the conversation. It was very interesting to learn. I got to be both a coach and a coachee along the way. And so I do use these techniques. I do a lot of coaching even today, whether it's formal or just a one-off. I try to use those techniques as much as I can.
Well, it sounds difficult actually on first impressions, but I suppose like many difficult things, it is worth it. It sounds like a little more effort perhaps than some people put into coaching.
I get a lot of energy from it. And, having been in similar positions as many of the folks who come to me for coaching have been in, I get a lot of enjoyment about it, and hopefully people benefit.
Well, it's absolutely extraordinary. And it's a good segue actually to my question about mentors and coaching, because clearly you are very giving now in that domain. Have you had any mentors or key people for your own career who influenced you along the way?
I would say I've had through the years a couple of sponsors. I've been lucky enough to have a couple of really fabulous sponsors that have really stepped up and put their necks out for me through the years. These are both in my financial career. I'm eternally grateful to them. That's always been great. And I would say I also have a network of people mostly from my years at Bear Stearns that I routinely check in with and just have so much respect for. Many of them have landed in fabulous jobs, running companies as asset managers, and we're still very much in touch with each other. And then also, I would say I get a lot of inspiration from my husband. He is I'll describe him, he's an IT, communications IT guy by training. But in recent years, I describe him as a nonprofit entrepreneur. He runs a nonprofit, and their mission is to collect used laptops from people who no longer have use for them, and then refurbish them so that they can be used, and then to give them to needy kids. And so you can imagine this was hugely helpful to people over the pandemic. And it's been great to see this work and the number of kids that he's been able to help with that. And just the heart that he has for giving these laptops away, just really inspirational to me.
Well, that's amazing. I may be sending him a few from our storage, and I'll put the link.
Yeah, let me know.
I'll put the link to his nonprofit in the show notes, because I'm sure many of us have laptops that have built up over the years that we're afraid to throw away lest someone get their hands on our so precious information. If we knew it was going to save hands.
Exactly. He has a whole team that scrubs them before they go out. So
no, that's a wonderful cause. And linked to that, was there any advice that you received, or words of wisdom, or any creed or motto that you live by in your career?
So I would say that for me, it's been about many things can be scary. Certainly from a distance, they can be scary. But as you get closer, the scariness really can subside. And so my advice would be, it's okay to be scared, but just do it anyhow. How bad really can you mess up if you're giving something your all and really trying to go do a good job? Your attitude and how you come back in the long run from a failure or a mistake is going to matter way more than initially failing at something. So I would say, yes, things appear bigger than they actually are. And again, it's okay to be scared, but do it. Do it anyhow.
Well, I love that advice. Well, you clearly conquered that fear early, because I've always considered debate to be one of the scariest pursuits in high school and college. And I probably could be a reasonably good debater now in my 40s, but not.
I think you could be.
But I certainly wasn't ready for it then. So the fact that you conquered it then, my hat is well off to you. Well, thank you so much, Sara. It's been a pleasure speaking with you today, and to really unpack some of the richness in your background, from the creative pursuits to music, into the very thoughtful way that you bring all that together now in your professional career and your multiple board roles. So thank you for coming here and for sharing that richness with us.
Well, thank you for being interested. I've really enjoyed the chat, and I wish well to all.
I'm Aoife Devitt. Thank you for listening to the 50 Faces podcast. If you liked what you heard and would like to tune in to hear more inspiring investors and their personal journeys, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as investment advice, and all views are personal and should not be attributed to the organizations and affiliations of the host or any guest.